Hey everybody, Mr. Lake here again to continue our discussion of Unit 2 in Biology A, which is everything having to do with the biochemistry of life. Now, our first official stop on this train towards knowledge is talking about photosynthesis, the way that energy gets introduced into the cycle of life. Now, before we get started, I want to just take a second and ask you, what was the last time that you expressed your appreciation to a plant? When was the last time that you went out and gave a tree a hug or, you know, stopped a sunflower and said, "Hey, I love you, bro"? Because you should be doing that all the time because plants are the reason why we are all here. They are the reason that there is even food for us to eat and energy for us to absorb. It's all because of them. We wouldn't be here without them. So, I'm sure that many of you have heard of photosynthesis before. So, what is it really? Getting a little bit deeper, more than just photosynthesis is how plants capture the sunlight energy. Getting a little bit deeper than that, what is it? It is actually a chemical reaction. And it's a chemical reaction that occurs in green plants. It also occurs in some other organisms like certain bacteria. There are even interesting like snails and stuff that can do this, which is kind of cool. And what happens is that sunlight is just one basically ingredient that goes into this process. It is not the beginning and the end of the process. So, what plants are doing is they are taking the energy from the sun and they are using that energy to break apart carbon dioxide and water molecules and then reform those things into new molecules like sugars, glucose. And actually a waste product, it makes oxygen. So that oxygen that we're dependent on, that we breathe, that we couldn't live without, that's a waste product of plants. And that energy, that glucose that we need to function and to do everything, that is a product of photosynthesis. Now, where does this actually happen? Photosynthesis happens in a special organelle that you only find in plants and other photosynthesizing organisms. And that organelle is called the chloroplast. So humans don't have these, but plants do. And more specifically, within each chloroplast, there are a bunch of membranes, basically. And in those, there's a whole bunch of this particular pigment called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is it's a chemical in cells that allows plant cells to absorb sunlight and make that reaction I was talking about happen, where it breaks apart the carbon dioxide and water and makes glucose. Now, chlorophyll does not absorb green or yellow light. As you can see by this little picture here, chlorophyll absorbs a lot of red light, it absorbs a lot of blue light, it absorbs some orange light. It basically absorbs all of the different frequencies of light, but it does not absorb any yellow or green light. So yellow and green light reflect off of leaves. They reflect off of chlorophyll. That's why leaves appear green. If you've ever wondered why a leaf is green, it's because green and yellow light, that's the light that the plant isn't absorbing. And so when white light hits the leaf, it absorbs everything except for the green and yellow light. That bounces off and hits your eyes. So you see green or kind of a yellowish green. That's why plants are green. Okay, so chlorophyll inside chloroplasts, inside plant cells, is what is causing this chemical reaction of photosynthesis to happen. So, what is a chemical reaction to begin with? Well, it's basically any process that changes one or more things into something else. So for photosynthesis, this is important, right? Make sure that you write this down in your notes, this photosynthesis equation. In photosynthesis, the reaction that's occurring is that carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight are reacting, and that is forming glucose and oxygen. Specifically, it takes 6 molecules of CO2 or carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O or water and a bunch of sunlight to make a single molecule of glucose. That's what this C6H12O6 thing is. That's glucose. And as a waste product, it makes 6 O2 molecules. Now, if you count everything up, right, each of these images represents one of the things that goes into or comes out of the photosynthesis reaction. If you count up all the things that are here, you'll notice that there's the same number of like oxygens on the left-hand side as there are on the right-hand side. There's the same number of carbons on the left and the right. There's the same number of hydrogens on the left and the right. And that's really important. I'm not going to get too far into that. That's really a chemistry thing. You'll learn a lot about that when you take chemistry, but it's something to keep in mind. That's why we say that it takes 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water, is because that's how many of those molecules it would actually take to make one glucose. So if you wanted to say it in words, right, the way that we would say that thing that you just wrote down and that I just talked you through is that carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight combine to make glucose and oxygen. That is photosynthesis. The way that this ties to the last video that you watched, which was all about metabolism, is that photosynthesis is a part of metabolism, which might not make a lot of sense because we usually think about metabolism when you've maybe heard people talk about the metabolism of people and that sort of thing. When we think about metabolism, we're usually thinking about the way that we break down food and use the energy that's in food. But that's not what photosynthesis is at all. Photosynthesis is a way to build energy. It's still a part of metabolism because metabolism refers to the whole family of processes that transforms energy in living things, right? So metabolism also includes all of the ways that energy molecules are formed, which is mainly photosynthesis. Now, here's something interesting to think about. Is photosynthesis the only way to get energy without eating something? The answer is no. There's actually another way. It might not be something that you've ever heard of before because it's not something that we really think about very often because it doesn't happen around us. What I'm going to talk about now is a process called chemosynthesis. This does not happen really on the surface of the earth, which is where we live, right? We live on land. This doesn't happen on land. And the reason that this doesn't happen on land is because photosynthesis happens on land, because there's sunlight available from the sun when we're on land. So chemosynthesis is something that happens in places where there is no sunlight. Where is there no sunlight on Earth? Well, you can probably think of a few places, but one of the biggest biomes, one of the biggest places where things live that there is no sunlight is at the bottom of the ocean, right? So in places like this, what happens is that there are organisms that instead of using the sunlight energy to make sugars, they use energy that they find in other chemicals around them. And they use that energy to do the same thing that happens in photosynthesis. They use the energy that they find in other chemicals to break apart carbon dioxide, break apart water molecules, put them together, and make sugars, which introduces sugars into that ecosystem. It means that now they have sugars that they can use. It means that other things can eat them and that they will then have sugars that they can use. And so there are chemosynthesizers out there that form the basis of some food webs in places where there's no sunlight, which is pretty incredible. But there does have to be some form of energy, right? In order to capture energy, there's got to be energy out there. So where a lot of these chemosynthesizers live is they live near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. At the bottom of the ocean, there's no sunlight. There's a certain point in the ocean where basically all sunlight has been absorbed or filtered out or reflected away, and there's no sunlight at the bottom of the ocean, especially where the ocean is really deep. So photosynthesis isn't possible, but there are also hydrothermal vents where there's all of this gas and all of these chemicals and all of this heat that is coming from the geology of the earth, from like the mantle and the magma that is underneath the crust of the earth, and it's spewing up into the ocean. And so at these hydrothermal vents, there's all this energy. Now, to something like us or a plant or anything that's used to living on the surface of the ocean, that actually would be a really unlivable situation. Hydrothermal vents are super hot and they are spewing out all of this toxic gas, stuff that if we were to breathe, after not too long, we wouldn't be alive anymore. It's not something that we could sustain, but there's organisms that have evolved to not just be able to live there, but to actually be able to utilize that. So they take in chemicals that are being spewed out of these hydrothermal vents, and they break those chemicals down and use that to make sugars. And you can kind of see that in this equation that's down at the bottom of the page here, where this looks it looks very similar to photosynthesis, except that on the left-hand side here, we've got 6 carbon dioxide, that looks familiar, 6 water, that looks familiar, but instead of sunlight, we've got hydrogen sulfide. So what it's going to do is it's going to break apart these hydrogen sulfides, and the energy that releases, it's going to use to break apart the carbon dioxides in the waters. And then once those are broken apart, it's going to piece them back together into sugars, right? Same exact product as photosynthesis. Different waste product though, because since there's more stuff involved like sulfur and that sort of thing, we get these waste products instead of just oxygen. But otherwise, photosynthesis and chemosynthesis are pretty much the same thing. They break down carbon dioxide and water. They form sugars. The end goal is making sugars in both of these processes. The end result is making sugars, so they are the same in that way. The thing that's different is the source of energy, right? But the most important thing I want you to take away from this is that there are ways that things can harness energy from their surroundings other than photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the one that you've probably heard of. That's the one that we think about because we live on the surface of the earth. You might think that these chemosynthesizers is like, oh, it's just a few little bacteria or something at the bottom of the ocean. It's no big deal. Remember that the earth is covered by more ocean than land. So actually, these chemosynthesizers, we just don't understand them or appreciate them very well because we don't see them in our lives, but they actually form the basis of massive ecosystems underneath the ocean. Huge, huge ecosystems, absolutely full of life and teeming with different living things. And these chemosynthesizers are the source of the energy that all of those ecosystems use, kind of like plants and photosynthesizers are the source of all the energy that we use on land. So don't think that chemosynthesizers are just like a little tiny fraction of life on Earth. It's actually the basis of a big piece of life on Earth, just one that we don't see because we don't live around it. It's an interesting, mind-opening thing to think about. Now, lastly, before I finish off this video, there is one more vocabulary word that I want you to add to your vocabulary. So make sure you write this down. And that is the word autotroph. And maybe you've heard this before. But an autotroph is an organism that can harness energy from their surroundings. So autotroph refers to both photosynthesizers and chemosynthesizers. All of those organisms harness energy from their surroundings to capture it and make new energy containing molecules. So add that term autotroph to your vocabulary. And that's it. Now you know a little bit more about photosynthesis. Hopefully, you know a little bit more than you did before. And now you know a little bit more, hopefully, about chemosynthesis than you did before. And that's the end of this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.